So, Steve, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Listen, there's now around 1,000 who have died, and that includes, I think, 11 Americans. When you heard the news, you and I were texting, but when you first heard the news, what did you feel?
Well, like everybody else, I was horrified, but it was also combined with a feeling of gratitude as I was scheduled to depart for Israel myself 24 hours before the carnage began, to begin a season, my fall guiding season of 5 tours. If the carnage had been delayed by 24 hours, I would have been caught up in all the chaos that's currently unfolding. So while I was shocked with everybody else, viscerally, you can't but be shocked. I also felt gratitude, and I saw the sovereign hand of God over my own circumstances. It worked out the best it possibly could for me personally, but I will tell you this, that among people that I work with, there's a tour guide that you've had on one of your tours who co-guided a tour of mine with yours named Tisha. Her niece was killed at the music festival. The office manager of Sarel Tours by the name of Uri, his son-in-law to be, was murdered. In other words, just know that this is. And there are people also who work at Sarel Tours whose relatives are among the unknown, or let's say the unfound, and may even be hostages in Gaza. So when you say 1,000 people, Skip, just to bring that home to people here in the States, when you consider the scale of populations between the two countries, it would be about 25,000 dead in the United States. Remember that you and I were witnesses of the Second Intifada, which claimed 1,000 lives over 3 years. This claimed the exact same amount of people in only a few hours.
Wow.
So of course it's mind-boggling if you reduce it to these statistics. 25,000 dead if you scale it to the American population, and the entire Second Intifada, which you and I knew at the time to be the darkest days of that country's history at the time, has now been eclipsed by the darkest day in Israel's history, all of which took place on Saturday the 7th. Almost 50 years to the day of the Yom Kippur War. And also important because even though between the Yom Kippur War and Saturday's events, Israel's been in many military conflagrations that you and I consider wars, but in their own terminology, they were always termed as military operations. When Israel declared war on Hamas on Sunday, it now made it the first war in 50 years. In other words, to Israel, all those other things were kids' play compared to this war. This is the first declared war that Israel's had since the 1973 Yom Kippur War, which many cite as a precedent for this shocker also.
So, when you hear the news and you served in the IDF,
Yes.
you were there for how long?
Well, when I was drafted, it was based on my age at the time. I was 24 years old. So I served for 2 years in the compulsory service, and then for about 10 years following in the reserves.
Now, do you think like a soldier? Because you still know people who serve in the military there.
Well, I thought as a soldier, and you'll find this may be interesting, a lot of the knowledge I have on this attack has come from Hamas associated sites. I've watched footage taken from the Hamas attackers. They chronicled and vlogged this with such adroitness, for lack of a better term. And one of the bases that they overran on the Gaza border was a base associated with my own military unit that I was in, the battalion known as the 51st Battalion of the Golani Brigade. And I saw the whole thing filmed by the Hamas invaders, and I saw the Golani flag and the battalion flag amongst the corpses of the soldiers on the ground. The soldier in me not only identified, of course, with that particular unit, but what shocked me was how quickly the base was overrun as if there wasn't even a fight. And that's what's shocking about all this. How rapid this invasion took place. It's believed that at least 1,500 terrorists infiltrated the country through 40 breaches of the border fence, in addition to the paragliders that maybe some of you have seen on footage. air, sea, and land invasion, and Israel's even elite soldiers were killed easily. And I think that's what adds the humiliation to the shock. It's not only a shock, but it's a humiliation. And I would say that I would tell you that the second Intifada almost eviscerated what was left of Israel's left wing. And by the way, when I say left wing in the Israeli context, I'm referring to those that have always upheld the belief of land for peace. While that second Intifada almost eviscerated that movement, this totally destroyed it. I would say there's almost nobody left in Israel. I'm not only referring to people that want to make peace with the Palestinians, but the country's almost united with one voice to flatten Gaza. In other words, the secular humanism of the left that often humanized the enemy, such as Hamas, no longer. Right, because of the it's a national humiliation, a shock, and what it is eventually will give way to anger because of the government. Remember, Golda Meir, who was the prime minister in 1973, after the war, her prime ministership ended in disgrace over this. There's no way the current prime minister Netanyahu survives this politically. It's true that the country will form a united stance and government during the war, however long that takes, but he will similarly, unfortunately, fall in disgrace because of this. And everything that led up to it, so it's amazing the parallels with that 73 war, but I think that this is even a darker day. Saturday, October 7th was the darkest day in Israel's national history. That's not going by my words, but by nearly every single person who comments on it on their media in Hebrew. It's become the consensus. It was the darkest day, the day of infamy.
Wow. So, Steve, tell us a little bit about Hamas, this group known as Hamas. We know the name. Most Americans have heard it. I don't think they understand what it is in particular, because there are so many groups in the Middle East that are poised against Israel. Tell us about Hamas.
So the name Hamas is an acronym in Arabic for the Islamic Resistance Movement. And according to their charter, they stand for three things I can just think of off the top of my head. Jihad against the Jews in particular, jihad against the world in general, in other words, all infidels. First, the Saturday people means they'll first kill the Jews, then the Sunday people means they'll secondly kill the Christians. And to set up a global caliphate, the same belief that ISIS had, the same belief that Al-Qaeda had. It's just a local Palestinian expression of it, but with the same inspiration, the same methodology. As became, I'm not sure how aware you have become of the grisly details of this attack, but on one kibbutz that was overrun by these attackers, 40 babies were killed, many of them were beheaded, others were burned alive. So their tactics, similar to what you know of the ISIS era, in Iraq and Syria. And it's a jihadist organization associated with the global jihad, but it's the local Palestinian expression of that global jihad.
How does Hamas relate to Al-Aqsa Brigade, Hezbollah, and a number of others? And are they independent of Iran? Are these independent groups? Are they in concert with each other? Are they in concert with a nation?
So it's a great question, and it's just amazing because Iran, as you know, is the head of the Shiite world. Since the death of Muhammad and the controversy over who should succeed him as prophet, the Shiites and Sunnis have been in each other's throats, except on this one issue where Iran has succeeded to give patronage to both the Shiite group Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, which is of the same religious group as they are. But Hamas is Sunni, and yet Iran has embraced them as if they're in the family of Iran's religious sphere. So that is fascinating how Iran has done that. Right. Iran has basically cultivated, and Hamas existed before Iran's patronage of them. What it is in the last few years, Iran adopted them and supplied them with arms, gave them very similar training to what they offered Hezbollah. And therefore, they're almost on Hezbollah's level in terms of their skills, although they don't yet have Hezbollah's guided missile systems on their weapons as Hezbollah does. But the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades, which you mentioned, they're basically the Fatah's armed militia. In other words, the PLO, which is often
Palestinian
contrasted with
Liberation
Hamas.
Organization.
The Palestine Liberation Organization, which today governs the West Bank, the Judea, Samaria. You have Israel as a wedge between two Palestinian entities. The Gaza Strip, which is a sovereign state in every meaning of the term. Israel withdrew its forces from there in 2005 and 2006 under Ariel Sharon. Shortly thereafter, Hamas took over, and they are the sovereign government of a sovereign territory. As opposed to that, the Palestinian Authority, which rules in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, they're not fully sovereign like Hamas is in the Gaza Strip. They're sovereign over Palestinian population centers such as Hebron, Nablus, Bethlehem. Israel grants them sovereignty and self-rule there, but Israel controls all the territories between those population centers because you have a lot of Jews who live in those areas, and Israel chooses not to put those Jews under Palestinian security sovereignty.
So where does Iran fit into all these groups? So like Hamas, do you think this was staged by Iran?
Every one of your listeners may be interested that the Wall Street Journal in the last couple of days had a very good expose on that, where they claim that the evidence points to Iran being behind it. That 2 weeks ago, one of the senior leaders of Hamas, together with one of the senior leaders of Hezbollah, met together in Beirut with the main emissary of Iran to that meeting, and it was probably hatched or the green light was given then. Absolutely. I don't think anybody on the ground doubts that. But what's interesting is how Israel's refusing to admit it publicly, because to do so means that Iran is culpable and deserves to be attacked. And I think Israel is so overwhelmed with the battle going on currently parochially in the Gaza Strip. They don't want the war to grow into a regional war with Iran, and therefore they've sort of tried to douse those rumors, even though I don't think anybody in Israel's establishment thinks for a minute that Iran wasn't fully involved in it. It shows you the trepidation of Israel as this war is winding up. Now, I often tell people that you have men that have led history, but then you have men that have been led by history, whether they like it or not. Where this war leads is not necessarily in the hands of Israel's leaders. I have a feeling that this war is going to shock us, just how far it goes. Not only do I think Hezbollah will get involved, I think the war in the Middle East itself may not end until it reaches the threshold of the Ayatollah's doorstep in Iran. But I also think you're going to see a lot of chaos in the world at large, including American cities. You're starting to see, for instance, here in Philadelphia, as well as New York and Toronto, Canada, there's already been mass pro-Hamas rallies, the most famous of which probably was in Sydney, Australia, because the crowd shouted without shame, "Gas the Jews." It wasn't just down with Israel. In other words, it shows you the nefarious nature behind all this pro-Palestinianism. It's nihilistic, and it's targeting the annihilation of the Jewish people. Not just it's not about bringing Israel to a negotiation table to settle with the Palestinians. It's always been a nihilistic movement to annihilate the Jewish people for no other reason that we're infidels who have been resettled in our national and historic homeland, which they consider to be Islamic Holy Land.
Given the fact that Iran is behind this, that this has been well planned and staged, one wonders why Hamas attacked now. Was it the fact that we gave them $6 billion? Was it the fact that there's judicial reform concerns in Israel? Was it the fact that Israel was going to sign a peace agreement with the Saudis, or all the above?
All right, I'm not going to say all the above, but I will definitely say two of them for sure. the peace movement towards Saudi Arabia, that seemed to be bearing fruit, and maybe something would be announced in the next couple of weeks, but also the internal strife of Israel for the last year, in which many people warned. The writing was so obviously on the wall, because if you take the Arabs at their own word, if you monitor their own media, Hezbollah's leaders, Iran's leaders, Hamas's leaders said, look, the Zionist enemy is on their knees. This is the weakest they've ever been. To them, this was a sign from Allah that Israel is ripe for the taking. As it relates to the other issues, the $6 billion, even though I think, and this is rarely will I get into politics with, when I'm being interviewed here on a church site. But look, while I think it was total capitulation, that America gave them $6 billion to release hostages. In doing so, it put the price on all future American hostages at something like $1.2 billion. Just know that the American government paid $1.2 billion for each hostage. Now that shouts to the whole world, take an American, you'll get $1.2 billion. But to be honest, because I am a fact-based person, none of that $6 billion has yet been fungible or usable. In other words, it was put into an account that has not yet released its funds to Iran. So I couldn't claim that those $6 billion have been used to purchase these weapons. What I can say is that other monies that have been transferred to Iran in the past, as well as monies that have been retransferred to the Palestinian entity in Gaza. Remember that the last American administration cut off all funding to the Palestinian Hamas government in Gaza. This present one reestablished that financial channel. We all know from the past that funds that go to feeding the Palestinians and building schools often goes to cement used to build tunnels and stuff like that. So no, I think that's a fair assessment. But I know that it's currently popular to say that the $6 billion that was paid, in ransom is already being used and was used quick enough and rapidly enough already to buy, and that's just not true.
Sure, but if you have $6 billion behind you, you can.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Like I said, it was a capitulation to terrorism that in the future may cost other Americans to be taken hostage. Yes.
Okay, so Stephen, look, these are obvious atrocities. There's no question. You see these images and videos coming in, and yet, if you listen to some of the other side, there's a narrative claiming it's Israel's fault. It's what I get on my social media when I put on posts about praying for Israel. There's people who are waiting for this because they want to tout the other narrative. I want you to respond to those who claim this is really Israel's long-term policy consequence.
Well, look, first of all, I want to say, Skip, that where people stand on the Arab-Israeli conflict betrays a lot more about them than where they stand on the Arab-Israeli conflict. It cuts down to their orientation on all sorts of things, whether they believe in God or whether they're atheists, whether they're leftist or whether they're rightist. There's many issues behind where people stand on the Arab-Israeli conflict. But, the main charge is that Israel in the past, when they go to war with the Gaza Strip, innocents are killed in the process, and therefore Israel's cruel and kills innocents. And I would say, look, Israel has inadvertently and unintentionally killed innocents in a built-up, the most densely populated strip in the world is the Gaza Strip. The Hamas leadership hides behind its civilian population as a great example that really meets the gold standard of it. Back in 2014, during Operation Cast Lead, the whole Hamas leadership made its headquarters under the main hospital of Gaza City, which presented Israel with the choice, and they were two awful choices. Either preserve the lives of Hamas's leadership to fight that war and fight another day in the future, which is an awful choice. We are living with the consequences of that right now, versus dropping a bomb on that hospital and killing all the people in it and being accused of a war crime.
What did they decide to do?
Excuse me?
What did they decide to do of those two options?
Well, there's two choices. They let the Hamas leadership to fight another day, and that same leadership just committed the worst atrocity in Israel's history. So You see innocents die on both sides. The difference being that the enemies of Israel intentionally target innocents, as they did at the music festival, in which they killed over 260, mostly girls. You'll see. Look, and I know this is going to sound very. It's not nice to describe some of these things, but the two most famous footages to be released from this carnage was one girl who was being taken into the Gaza Strip, her corpse, as it was being ridden in there on the back of a pickup truck. All the Gazan rank and file, everyday people, not Hamas, but the people, ran up to defile her body, spit on her body. Another girl who was taken alive and filmed alive in captivity was bleeding from the crotch. I know that's not pleasant to talk about on a church website, but bleeding from the crotch, which obviously meant that she had been raped in the process of being taken in. There is no record of that behavior of Israel towards its enemies. The Israel's enemies do this not as collateral damage. This is the damage they intend from the beginning. Whereas whatever innocents die in the process of Israel's wars, these are unintended consequences.
In the past, and so there's an all-out formal declaration of war. Is that correct?
That's correct, for the first time in 50 years.
Okay, so in the past, Israel contained Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but did not eliminate it. Now it's a threshold moment. The stakes have changed, and it sounds like Israel is determined to neutralize the threat, so there is no organized Hamas leadership in those borders. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. You're talking about a ground invasion that will ultimately lead to those goals being realized. That's correct.
So you served in the IDF, Steve. What do you expect to see going forward? What do you think Israel's going to do next? What can we expect to see in the next coming days?
I think a classical case of urban combat, which gets very ugly, but with the assistance of technology we haven't seen yet in such combat. Israel is the world's leader in combat technology, such as drones, and I think we're going to see things that shock people. It doesn't mean that there won't be a lot of casualties. Most observers believe that Israel could lose at least 500 soldiers in such a ground offensive, which again, for a country that small, is a big deal. It's a big number. But I think you're going to see technology and the integration of technology and human fighting power that we haven't seen yet. We've seen some of it in the Ukraine war, but I think we're going to see some stuff in this war that surprises us.
Do you foresee this incursion by Israel into the Gaza, if and when it happens? Do you see it as a house by house, door to door, kind of that slow, painful process?
Unfortunately. And look, the reason is, cutting to your question a few minutes ago, is because Israel wants to mitigate killing innocents. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. Even by the most conservative polls, only something like 15% of the Palestinian population, 15, not 50, 15% of the population of Gaza is not of the same theological orientation or goal orientation of Hamas. In other words, 85% of Gaza fully agrees with what Hamas did and has always done. In other words, so we first have to establish this for a minute, that you have an entire population, save for 15%, that is so saturated with Jew hatred and Islamic fanaticism that they fully support. Nobody can honestly say that they're being led by the scruff of their neck against their will. They believe with all their hearts in what Hamas has done. And yet Israel is being tasked, much like if you remember the dialogue between God and Abraham in the book of Genesis over Sodom. But if there's only 50 people in Sodom, will you still destroy it? And God says, nope, if I find 50 people, I won't destroy it. And if you remember, Abraham negotiates it all the way down to maybe 10 people, 5 people. The problem is we as humans don't have God's ability to do that. You know, people expect Israel to be able to do what God did with Sodom, to know who the 5 are or who the 10 are that aren't fully in Hamas's camp, and it's just impossible. And yet, Israel is willing to sacrifice its own sons and daughters, and it will do this in a ground offensive when they could easily wipe the place out in, and I'm not exaggerating, a nanosecond. So going back to when you said, well, Steve, how about all these people that always force this artificial moral equivalency? Just let them know Israel's always had the ability to, if they wanted to, commit genocide, and it would be an easy thing to do. They could do it in nanoseconds, and the country doesn't do it. You know, they'll sacrifice their the cream of the crop is society there in order to preserve lives of those that want to kill them. So I think that speaks volumes about the incredible contrast of the values of the two civilizations. One values life so much, including the lives of its enemies, that it's willing to sacrifice its sons and daughters and what's to come in the next few weeks. Whereas the other one hides behind their children in order to kill with impunity.
Give me a little bit of your experience in this next question. Hostages have been taken, worst case scenario, nightmare scenario. Quite a number are still, we presume, in tunnels or somewhere in cages. We don't know.
Yes.
But given your experience with that scenario, hostages and negotiation, what are you optimistic?
No, I'm not actually. And I think Israel's already given their answer to this. Hamas threatened yesterday to start executing a hostage for every attack that the Israeli army makes without notifying, in advance that it's going to make it. And Israel's still making these attacks. So I think there's an expression in the world of combat sports for the people that are watching this that are either boxing or UFC fans. When you say a fighter has to bite down on their mouthpiece, in other words, weather the storm and just do what it takes. And I think Israel's decided to bite down on its mouthpiece and even risk the hostages, that have been taken to win. In other words, not to let the hostages even prevent them from doing what has to be done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm not optimistic that we'll ever see those people alive. And yesterday, myself and many Jewish people had this philosophical talk about what would I do in like circumstances at that musical festival yesterday. If I were given the choice to resist unto death or being taken as a hostage to Gaza, I personally would have preferred to resist unto death. And that's not to slight the people who went as hostages, because our intuition as human beings is to want to live at all costs.
Preserve life.
But when you remember the face of the evil, this enemy, who this enemy is, personally, I would have preferred to have resisted unto death rather than be taken as a hostage, especially these girls. The most painful images for me of this entire onslaught on Saturday were the girls taken alive. These girls are, and like I said, footage of girls bleeding already from the crotch. They've already been raped, and the ones that haven't will be. What kind of existence is that, to be in captivity of Hamas? It's a living hell. And I personally would prefer to die resisting being taken a hostage. I don't have a good answer for that. What you asked, it makes the issue, of course, far more complex. But based on Israel's actions that I've seen heretofore, it looks as if they've decided to go full-on attack, even if that means that some of these hostages are killed in the process.
So, Steve, you have an audience now on a website and to a church that is being streamed around the world. If you want just to leave us with a few remarks, because we often, as believers, maybe make the mistake of getting our news source from a very limited perspective, or the voices of the enemies drown out a clear perspective. Being an American yourself and an Israeli who has lived in both places, what would you leave us with going forward in this situation as believers?
What, as it relates to doing research on the media?
No, as it relates to how we are to think and pray and responsibly stand for Israel going forward.
Excellent. So I think on Saturday we saw a moral clarity that has rarely been presented to us. The face of pure evil on display versus the face of its victims. And I think, Skip, in the next few weeks, a lot of people, including Christians, are going to be put to the test. As Israel entrenches itself in this war, you're going to see the amping up of anti-Semitism is going to amp up dramatically. Dramatically, you're going to see these mass pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian rallies throughout every American city. It's possible that your coworkers, those that work in secular endeavors, their coworkers are going to confront them and say, "Aren't you one of these pro-Israel nut job Christians? Look at these people. Look at these Jews." A lot of Christians are going to have to be, they're going to be tested.
Mm-hmm.
And how successful they are on that test has to do with their convictions. And where their convictions are has to do with how much time they spend with the Lord each day. So one of the things, and this may surprise you, this answer, because you were asking me about politics, but now I'll just give my one spiritual insight. We're so bombarded, and unfortunately, so many of us spend so much time in front of cable news more than we do in the presence of the Lord. And we've entered a very dark time where if we're going to survive these days, Skip, if we're going to pass the test as individuals, we have to spend that time in the presence of the Lord and let that other stuff be chatter. And if there's anybody listening to this who can do what you call in Hebrew a hashbon nefesh, an accounting of where's my soul, where's the state of my soul today? Am I allowing my soul to be filled more by cable news and by headlines, and by all the emotions that stirs more than I'm spending quality time with the Lord each day, whether that's in the morning or whatever time that person does that? The well of our strength is in that time, not the time that we spend in front of the TV or news sites. And I just want, and by the way, I'm preaching to myself. The last couple of weeks, I've been doing everything I can, even before this broke out, this war, to really dig deep into my daily fount of strength, because it doesn't come from the media, it doesn't come from the chatter, it comes from the spirit that's within. For those of us that are believers. And that's what I would say to encourage all of us. And that's not exclusive to the Israel issue or anything going on. We've entered a very dark time. We're already in that time.
Yeah.
The only way any of us can survive it and stay clean and keep our garments clean and be able to love the other, even people who we disagree with, is to go to that fount where we get the living waters, that Jesus spoke about in the book of John, the living waters that keep giving if you agree to go to them each day and drink from them.
Yeah, that's a good word. You sound like a preacher, Steve, but that is a good word because right now, the media, even the most liberal outlets, are very sympathetic to what's going on in Israel. That's going to change. That's going to change in days. And there's going to be this long litany of look what Israel's doing.
It shocks me what I've seen on CNN. I've seen CNN anchors weeping, who have gone to Israel, weeping at the carnage of the kids that were killed at the music festival. For the first time since I ever remember, you have CNN type correspondents who have been able to actually step in the shoes of the Jews as if they were their kids. Mm-hmm. It's been really remarkable. But you're right. That sympathy will be short-lived as the war that Israel sends back their way is it's going to get ugly. It's going to get ugly. War is ugly. There's going to be a lot of death, a lot of destruction. It may even cause chaos to global markets. It may cause chaos to people's lives here in America. It may cause chaos to gas prices, and all those pressures will start to be felt by people, and you'll see all that goodwill dissipate.
Yeah. Well, may we pass the test, my friend.
Yeah.
Steve, thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being a friend through the years. Thank you for speaking to our church from time to time and leading our tours. And we look forward to the future.
My pleasure, considering the circumstances, and I hope our paths physically cross sooner than later, my friend.
Thank you.